To honor my late husband, I paid for my family's dream vacation to Hawaii, only to find out they had secretly booked me a one-way ticket. They were so ungrateful they took my money and planned to leave me stranded, all so they could post perfect photos for their friends without their old mother in the way. But they made one arrogant mistake. They forgot whose name was on the bank account. So I let them get all the way to the airport before I made the one phone call that turned their Aloha fantasy into a public nightmare. It was the first big family dinner since we lost Robert, and the house felt cavernous without his laughter. My son Nathan and his wife Tanya had come over with the kids to officially start planning the big Hawaiian vacation. It was my idea, my treat. Robert and I had always promised to take the whole family, and I was determined to honor that promise to fill the silence in this house with plans for sunshine and togetherness. Tanya arrived like a whirlwind of forced cheerfulness, talking loudly about how much we all deserved this healing journey. She hugged me a little too tightly and spoke about creating core memories for the children. But her eyes never quite settled. They were strained, anxious, and darted constantly to the screen of her phone as if she were waiting for a verdict to be handed down. The planning, as it turned out, was not a collaboration. Tanya immediately took control, framing it as an act of profound kindness. She insisted I shouldn't have to deal with the stress of booking websites and coordinating flights. I tried to suggest the little beachfront hotel in Kauai, that Robert and I had loved, a quiet place with gardens and history, but she gently dismissed it. She explained that the big brand-name luxury resorts were simply better equipped for children, and more importantly, had incredible photo opportunities. Every decision was filtered through this lens. She steered the entire trip towards a single massive hotel in Maui, the one all her friends posted about on Instagram. My hopes for quiet walks on the beach and introducing my grandkids to our favorite local spots were systematically bulldozed under an avalanche of planned photo ops and kid-friendly water slides. It was all done with a bright, relentless smile that made me feel ungrateful for even questioning it. A week later, the plan was finalized. Tanya presented me with the bill on her sleek iPad, swiping through a presentation of first-class flights and oceanfront suites. The final number was staggering, a five-figure sum that made my breath catch. She explained she'd set up a centralized family travel account to make all the payments seamless. All I had to do was make the one wire transfer. As I sat in my office looking at the numbers on my banking app, I wasn't thinking about the cost. I was thinking of my husband's smile, of my grandchildren's laughter, echoing on a beach. This was my investment in them, in us. With a heart full of hope, I pressed the button, sending a huge piece of my savings and all of my trust into the account she controlled. The quiet that followed felt good for a few days. The trip was booked, a promise of happy memories on the horizon. It was a few days later, while changing the sheets in the guest room they'd used, that I found it. A piece of paper had fallen behind the nightstand. It was a printed itinerary. I smiled, thinking it was sweet. Tanya had printed a copy for me. But as my eyes scanned the page, a strange, cold feeling began to creep up my spine. The scheduled activities, a sunrise yoga class, a high-intensity spin studio, a tasting menu at a trendy, loud restaurant, were all things I actively disliked. It was Tanya's dream vacation, not ours. Then my eyes fell on the flight confirmation details at the bottom of the page. My blood ran cold. Outbound flight SFO to OGG, 4 passengers listed. Nathan, Tanya, and my 2 beautiful grandchildren. My name wasn't there. Confused, I scanned further down. There it was, a separate one-way flight booked for the same day for 1 passenger. Me. They weren't just excluding me from their plans. They were planning to abandon me there. By the way, if you're enjoying the story so far, please consider subscribing so you don't miss what's next. We'd also love to hear your own story if you'd like to share it with our community. Now, let's get back to it. I stood there in the guest room, the printed itinerary shaking in my hand, and the grief I felt was no longer just for my husband. It was for the family I thought I had. The shock was a physical blow, a cold wave that washed away the last of my naive hopefulness. But as the minutes ticked by, that cold shock didn't shatter me. It hardened me. It crystallized into a quiet, diamond-hard resolve. They had written me a one-way ticket out of their lives. Fine, I would make sure they paid for the postage. I spent the rest of the day composing myself, carefully placing a mask of gentle fragility over the cold fury in my heart. By the time brunch rolled around on Sunday, I was ready to make my first move. They were in their element. At the bustling Palo Alto Cafe, Tanya already angling her phone to get the perfect shot of her avocado toast for social media. I waited for a lull in the conversation, then turned to my son Nathan, deliberately ignoring his wife. I put on my most benevolent, slightly confused expression. I told him I'd been thinking about his father and how much he'd loved that little beachfront cafe in Lahaina. I then asked him a very simple, very specific question. I asked if he'd remembered to book a table for all of us for dinner on the Tuesday we arrive, reminding him how quickly it fills up. It was a surgical strike aimed directly at the weakest point in their conspiracy. The effect was instantaneous. Nathan, who I knew had been completely sidelined in the planning, looked like a deer in the headlights. He stammered something about checking the schedule. Tanya had made his eyes darting toward her, silently pleading for a rescue. And Tanya, of course, jumped in. Her voice was a little too bright, a little too cheerful. She told me, patting my hand, that they had planned a special relaxing room service dinner just for me that night. She said they didn't want me dealing with the crowds after such a long flight. Her excuse was so perfectly coated in the saccharine poison of weaponized politeness, but it was too late. The contradiction between his panic and her smooth lie was the only confirmation I needed. Their guilt was written all over their faces. That afternoon, I called my old friend Carol. She was a widow too, and had navigated her own share of drama with entitled children who saw her more as a bank account than a mother. I didn't lay out the whole sordid story. I didn't have to. I simply told her I was having some second thoughts about a large financial gift I'd given for a family trip. I asked her for some general advice on travel insurance and cancellation policies. Carol, who can read between the lines of a phone call better than anyone I know, was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that solidified my entire plan. She told me to forget the insurance and to first make damn sure the money was in an account that only I could control. She knew. She didn't need the details. She knew the game. My gentle inquiry had clearly rattled them. Over the next few days, Tanya's campaign of passive-aggressive concern escalated into a full-blown psychological operation. She started forwarding me articles with titles like "The Hidden Dangers of Overexertion for Seniors on Vacation." She began talking incessantly about the B and special assistance services at the airport, implying I'd need a wheelchair and a dedicated handler to simply get to the gate. It was a transparent, clumsy attempt to build a narrative that I was a frail, helpless burden. Every cloying word of concern was designed to reinforce their decision to exclude me, to make me feel like I was the problem. They had no idea that with every patronizing email and every phony offer of help, they weren't convincing me of my weakness. They were simply fueling the engine of my resolve. I became an actress. In the days that followed, I gave the performance of a lifetime. When Tanya would call, her voice dripping with false concern, I would sound frail and grateful. I thanked her profusely for the articles on seniors and travel telling her she was so thoughtful to be looking out for my well-being. I agreed that a quiet first night with room service was probably for the best, and that the special assistance at the airport sounded like a wonderful idea. I played the part of a slightly confused, deeply appreciative mother-in-law so convincingly that I could feel their relief through the phone. They believed their minor panic at brunch was a one-time thing, that they had successfully managed me back into my little box. They were safe. Their perfect free vacation was secure. Now, to understand the sheer depth of their desperation, you have to know what was happening behind the scenes at their house, something I wouldn't learn the full details of until much later. They were living in a state of quiet, frantic terror. It turns out Tanya had convinced Nathan to invest a huge chunk of their savings into a disruptive new tech startup pitched by a friend she'd met at a yoga retreat. The startup, of course, was a complete fraud. The friend vanished, and their money vanished with her. They were financially ruined, staring down the barrel of a complete collapse of the flawless, affluent lifestyle they so carefully curated. This Hawaiian vacation wasn't just a trip. It was a performance. It was a desperate attempt to project success and stability on social media, a series of perfect photos to hide the terrifying reality that they were broke. While they were busy managing my frailty, I was in my home office, supposedly taking a nap. I followed Carol's advice. I logged into my bank account, my heart pounding in my chest, and there it was, the full 5-figure sum sitting untouched in the travel account. I clicked through the account details, my eyes scanning the fine print until I saw the words I was looking for: sole signatory authority, Marilyn Vance. A wave of cold, powerful relief washed over me. They had been arrogant amateurs. In her rush to control the itinerary, Tanya had overlooked the one thing that mattered: control of the source. The money was still mine. I didn't move it. Not yet. Instead, I opened a new browser tab. I began methodically researching a completely different trip: a luxurious, all-inclusive wellness retreat in Sedona, Arizona for 3 people. I found the perfect one, with private casitas, spa treatments, and guided hikes through the Red Rocks. I put a hold on the booking. The final push. The thing that erased any lingering whisper of doubt came that evening. I was scrolling through my phone when a new post from Tanya popped up. It was a photo of my grandchildren smiling beautifully, standing next to brand new, brightly colored suitcases. The caption was a masterpiece of performative gratitude. It read, "Counting down the days until we can finally unplug and bond as a family in paradise so blessed. Hawaii, family first." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. The hashtag family first felt like a slap in the face. It was a public declaration of a victory. She hadn't won a smug celebration of a betrayal she thought she'd gotten away with. I looked at the picture of my sweet, innocent grandchildren being used as props in their parents' desperate lie, and the last flicker of hesitation in my heart was extinguished. The plan was no longer just a possibility. It was a promise. The Instagram post was the last grain of sand on the scale. Seeing my grandchildren's smiling faces used as props in their parents' desperate public lie solidified everything. The time for hesitation was over. The next morning, I didn't wake with anger, but with a profound and heavy sense of purpose. I made myself a cup of tea, sat in my sunlit kitchen, and picked up the phone. I didn't call my son. I called my personal banker, a kind and meticulous man named Mr. Gable, who had handled my finances for over 20 years. My voice was calm and steady. I told him there had been a significant change of plans regarding a recent family gift, and that I needed to recall the full amount of the wire transfer I'd made the previous week. I cited the account number from memory. There was a pause on his end, the gentle clicking of a keyboard, and then his reassuring voice. Citing our long-standing relationship and the sole signatory structure of my accounts, he assured me it was no problem at all. The funds would be back in my personal savings account within the hour, and just like that, the first decisive blow was struck. I spent the next hour in my garden pruning the roses my husband had planted. My hands were steady. As I worked under the warm California sun, I allowed myself to imagine the scene unfolding across town in that sleek, minimalist house built on a foundation of lies. I could picture Tanya, a triumphant smile on her face, finally sitting down at her laptop to book the coveted first-class seat upgrades that would look so good on her social media feed. I could see her logging into the travel account, her expression shifting from smug anticipation to a flicker of confusion. The screen would show a balance of 0. The confusion would curdle into disbelief, then into pure, unadulterated rage. I could almost hear the strangled scream that would follow the sound of her perfect, curated world imploding. She would have stormed through the house to find Nathan, her face a mask of fury, accusing him of moving the money, of betraying her. And that's when their flimsy conspiracy built on his weakness, and her greed would have fractured completely. The screaming match would have been biblical. All the terror and shame of their secret financial ruin would have come pouring out. She would have accused him of being a fool for getting scammed for ruining them. He, in turn, would have finally broken, accusing her of being reckless, of being materialistic, of pushing him to betray his own mother. Their partnership of deception would have dissolved into a toxic mess of blame and fear, the two of them trapped in the prison of the secret they had fought so hard to conceal. My phone rang at precisely noon, cutting through the peaceful quiet of the garden. I wiped the soil from my hands, took a deep, steadying breath, and answered. It was Nathan. His voice wasn't angry, not at first. It was a frantic, sputtering mess. He was stammering, demanding to know what happened, why the account was empty, why Tanya was screaming that their lives were over. He was a little boy again, terrified and running to his mother to fix a problem he couldn't understand. I let him ramble, listening to the raw panic in his voice. When he finally ran out of breath, I spoke. My own voice was calm, detached, and devastatingly polite. I simply stated that I had noticed the funds were no longer needed for the original family plan, so I had moved them back to my account for safekeeping. Before the sputtering on the other end of the line could form into another question, another demand, I pressed the red button on my screen. I hung up, leaving him and his wife powerless and terrified, stewing in the ringing silence of the consequences they had so arrogantly created for themselves. The days leading up to the flight were silent. After that one frantic phone call, neither Nathan nor Tanya tried to contact me again. I imagined their house was a storm of quiet panic and simmering resentment. They were trapped. Their social media posts had already promised a spectacular Hawaiian vacation. Their friends were expecting photos. Their entire curated world depended on them getting on that plane, but the ghost had emptied the vault. I, on the other hand, spent those days in quiet preparation. I confirmed the booking for the Sedona Wellness Retreat for myself and my two best friends, Carol and Jean. I packed clothes for warm days and cool desert nights, and on the morning of the flight, I did not wait for a call. I did not expect an apology. I simply got in my car and drove to the airport. We arrived at SFO with hours to spare, not because we were anxious, but because we intended to enjoy every moment. Carol, Jean, and I checked our bags, moved through security with the ease of seasoned travelers, and made our way to the Polaris Lounge. We settled into comfortable armchairs with glasses of champagne, a quiet celebration of our own. As I sat there surrounded by the calm hum of the exclusive lounge, I allowed myself to picture the scene I knew was unfolding just one terminal over at the bustling United check-in counter. I could see them arriving in a flurry of performative stress. Nathan hauling oversized suitcases, Tanya trying to wrangle the kids who were already whining. They were all dressed in matching linen outfits, a perfect Instagram-ready family on the verge of their dream vacation. They would look tense, but to any outside observer, they would look like the picture of affluent success. I could see Tanya approaching the counter, a practiced, charming smile fixed on her face as she handed over their passports. The agent's polite greeting would slowly morph into a look of professional confusion. I imagined the quiet tapping of keys, the frown, the murmured consultation with a colleague. Then the agent would deliver the first blow, her voice neutral but firm. She would inform Tanya that while the reservations existed, the tickets had never been paid for. The reservations had been automatically canceled. Tanya's smile would falter. She would insist there was a mistake, her voice still controlled, but with a new sharp edge. She would present her credit card, the one she used for everything, to pay for the tickets now. The agent would run it. A moment would pass. Then the quiet, devastating announcement that the card had been declined. She would try another, then a debit card. Declined. Declined. That is when the real judgment would begin. It wouldn't come from the airline agent who was just doing her job. It would come from the dozens of other travelers in the long, snaking line behind them. I could hear the symphony of their impatience, the heavy sighs, the pointed checking of watches, the shuffling of carry-on bags. The whispers would start quiet at first, then growing in volume. Tanya's carefully constructed facade of polished perfection would crack and then shatter completely. Her voice would rise in pitch, becoming shrill and entitled, as she argued with the agent demanding to speak to a manager. The kids, sensing the escalating tension and their mother's unraveling, would start to cry. It was the ultimate social death for a woman so obsessed with her public image, a loud, messy, and very public display of financial failure right in the heart of the Bay Area's travel hub. As I pictured them finally being forced to step away from the counter, a defeated and humiliated mess amidst their mountain of useless luggage, I took out my phone. The timing had to be perfect. I leaned in close to Carol and Jean, raising my glass. They smiled warmly, understanding that this was the moment. I snapped a photo, the three of us, happy and relaxed, clinking our champagne flutes against the serene backdrop of the exclusive lounge. I typed a short, simple caption. Then I found Nathan's number and sent it to him as a picture message. The caption read, "Decided to take that trip after all. Aloha." I pressed send, took a final sip of my champagne, and then turned my phone off completely. It was time for my flight. As I boarded the flight to Phoenix, I turned my phone off and felt a profound sense of release. I was leaving more than just California behind. I was leaving a lifetime of expectations and disappointments on the tarmac. The flight was peaceful. While my son and his wife were stranded in the wreckage of their own making, my friends and I were ascending into a clear, quiet sky. I learned the details of their aftermath later, pieced together from my son's eventual tearful confession. The drive home from the airport was, by his account, the longest and most silent of their lives. The silence punctuated only by the confused whimpers of the children in the back seat and the incessant buzzing of their phones. Text after text flooded in from friends, all cheerful variations of the same question: "Have you landed yet? Send pictures." Each notification was another small, sharp twist of the knife, a reminder of the public humiliation they now had to face. The perfect family vacation, so boldly announced on Instagram, had imploded before it even began. In the weeks that followed, their paths diverged. Their alliance, built on a shared secret, and fueled by Tanya's ambition, could not survive the harsh light of failure. Tanya, unable to process a world where she was not the winner, retreated into a shell of bitter resentment. Her vibrant social media presence went dark. She blamed Nathan. She blamed me. She blamed the universe, anyone but herself. She was a queen without a kingdom, and the silence was her abdication. Nathan, however, was different. Stripped of his wife's dominating influence and broken by the raw public shame of that day, something inside him finally cracked open. About a week into my trip, after days of silence, he left me a voicemail. It was rambling and tearful, the sound of a man who had finally hit rock bottom. For the first time, there were no excuses, no justifications. There was only a genuine, gut-wrenching apology for his weakness, for his betrayal, and for the pain he had caused. While their world was shrinking, mine was expanding in ways I never could have imagined. Sedona was more than a vacation. It was a resurrection. Carol Jean and I spent our days surrounded by the majestic spiritual beauty of the Red Rocks. We weren't just relaxing, we were healing. We sat by the pool, we walked the quiet trails, and we talked. We shared stories of our lives, our late husbands, and the unique, often frustrating experience of being underestimated by the very people we had raised. We found a powerful solidarity in our shared experiences, forging a bond of chosen family that was more authentic and supportive than the biological one I had just left behind. It was a week of genuine laughter and authentic connection, a stark contrast to the performative hollow happiness Tanya had been so desperately chasing. On my last evening in Sedona, I sat on my private balcony, watching the sunset paint the rocks in fiery shades of orange and red. I had listened to Nathan's voicemail several times, hearing the real pain and remorse in his voice. The anger in my heart had finally given way to a quiet, powerful peace. I took out my phone and composed a single text message to him. It wasn't a message of anger, nor was it a simple, easy absolution. It was a new contract, a new set of terms for our relationship. The message was brief. I told him that I forgave him. Then I wrote the most important part. I told him that his inheritance is his relationship with me, and that it is up to him to invest in it. I pressed send, took a deep breath of the cool desert air, and felt the final heavy chains of obligation fall away. Forgiveness was on the table, but respect was now and forever non-negotiable. Marilyn's story is a powerful reminder of what happens when family mistakes generosity for a blank check. The airport meltdown was satisfying, but her true victory wasn't just revenge. It was her decision to stop funding their fake happiness and start investing in her own authentic joy. She took the money meant for a trip of obligation and transformed it into a journey of healing with her chosen family. Her journey teaches us that the best revenge is to reclaim your resources and build a life so happy that there's no room left for those who took you for granted.